A 9-year-old boy traded seats with his sister to be with his friends, never realizing that a 63-inch gap of steel and a 2-hour delay were about to make that the last decision of his life. The dawn of December 14, 1961, arrived in Weld County, Colorado, not with a roar, but with a biting, crystalline silence that only the high plains can produce. In the small, unincorporated farming community of Auburn, 5 miles southeast of Greeley, the temperature had plummeted to a staggering 6 degrees Fahrenheit. A dense, silver-gray frost had settled over the landscape, encrusting the irrigation ditches, the dormant sugar-beet fields, and the windows of every farmhouse and vehicle in the valley. It was a morning that demanded effort, the kind of cold that made steel brittle and breath visible in thick, hanging clouds. For the families of Auburn, this was a day of transition. The rural school district had recently undergone consolidation, a process that had shuttered the old three-room Auburn schoolhouse and forced the local children to board a bus for a long, winding journey into the city of Greeley for their education. This morning ritual was a relatively new reality for many of the students, who now found themselves spending their early hours navigating the lattice of gravel roads that defined the agricultural grid of the county. The primary vehicle for this journey was Weld County School District 6 Bus Number 2, a 60-seat conventional yellow bus operated by Duane Harms. Harms, only 23 years old, was a man of quiet industry. He lived with his wife, Judy, and their 3-week-old daughter, Linda, in a modest 800-square-foot home that had once housed the local teacher. To support his young family, Harms worked a grueling schedule, driving the bus in the morning and afternoon and serving as a janitor at an elementary school during the day. On this morning, Harms followed a routine born of care. He had risen at 5:30 a.m. and started the bus engine at 7 a.m., allowing the interior to warm up so the children wouldn't have to sit on frozen vinyl seats. As Harms prepared to depart, approximately 90 miles to the east, another mechanical titan was in motion. The Union Pacific City of Denver streamliner train No. 111 was hurtling toward Greeley. It was a high-speed passenger train, an assembly of 3 massive diesel locomotives and 16 cars, carrying 173 passengers and a significant volume of Christmas mail. The train was a symbol of mid-century industrial elegance, designed to cover the vast distances between Chicago and Denver at speeds reaching 80 miles per hour. On this day, however, the train was struggling. A heavy volume of holiday mail had caused delays at several earlier stops, and by the time it cleared Fort Morgan, it was running nearly 2 hours behind its scheduled time. The intersection of these two paths, the slow, rhythmic school bus route and the high-speed, delayed streamliner, was a statistical anomaly. Had the train been on time, it would have passed through the Auburn crossing at 6:14 a.m., long before the bus even began its route. Instead, the delay set the stage for a collision that would become the deadliest traffic accident in Colorado history. The bus route that morning was a series of slow, deliberate loops through the farm country. Each stop was a gathering of siblings and cousins, many of whom had been friends since birth. The bus was more than a transport. It was a mobile social club where children from the ages of 6 to 16 discussed their upcoming Christmas plans and showed off new treasures. The first to board were the Munson children, Vicky, Gary, and Johnny. Their father, Raymond, dropped them off at the bus because he didn't want them standing in the 6-degree cold. They were followed by Cindy Dorn, an 11-year-old 6th grader who often rode with her cousins. At the Yetter farm, 16-year-old Jerry Hembry, the oldest student on the bus, boarded alone. His cousins, Colleen and Lady and Yetter, were still inside getting ready, delayed by a church program rehearsal the previous night. Jerry took the front seat, just behind the door, clutching a deck of cards. As the bus crunched along the gravel roads, it picked up the Freeman children, Melody, Joy, and Smith, and Sherry Mitchell, who was excited about visiting her father in the hospital later that day. At the Alice home, Linda Alice boarded, carrying her brother's wrestling medal for show and tell. A crucial and heart-wrenching detail of the morning involves a seat swapping that occurred as the bus reached its final capacity. Alice Larson, who had been sitting in the back, moved to the front to sit with Mary Lozano and Kathy Brantner so they could look at a Christmas book together. Simultaneously, her brother, 9-year-old Steve Larson, stood up from his seat near the front and went to the back to sit with his friends Bobby Smock and Calvin Craven. This minor social exchange, typical of a school bus, would ultimately decide which children lived and which died. The bus now held 36 students, 15 boys and 21 girls, along with 11 sets of siblings and 2 sets of cousins. The interior was a cacophony of children's voices, the whirring whirring of the defroster and the low drone of the engine. Harms, navigating the frosted landscape, approached the second railroad crossing on his route. The physical layout of the crossing southeast of Greeley was a design for disaster. It was a passive crossing, marked only by a crossbuck sign and lacked any mechanical gates, flashing lights, or bells. The Auburn crossing had an additional, lethal complication: the angle of intersection. Instead of crossing at a 90-degree angle, the gravel road and the railroad tracks intersected at an extreme diagonal of less than 30 degrees. For a driver heading northwest, an oncoming train from the southeast would be approaching from nearly directly behind their right shoulder. To see it, a driver would have to look back over their shoulder at a sharp, unnatural angle, peering through the bus's side and rear windows that, on this morning, were almost entirely obscured by thick white frost. Harms approached the tracks at approximately 7:58 a.m. Following his standard procedure, he brought the bus to a complete stop. Harms reached for the manual chrome handle and yanked open the folding door, a safety technique intended to help a driver hear the whistle of an approaching train. From his seat in the front, Jerry Hembry also looked out the open door and saw nothing. The sun sat low in the eastern sky, creating a haze that combined with the 6-degree air to create a shimmering visibility. Harms looked back over the heads of the children. The frosted side windows had only a slim 2-inch clear space at the top. He saw no movement and heard no whistle. Convinced the track was clear, he shifted the bus into gear and began to crawl across the steel rails. At that exact moment, the city of Denver streamliner was less than 100 feet away, barreling down the tracks at 79 miles per hour. In the cab of locomotive number 955, engineer Herbert Summers and fireman Melvin Swanson saw the bus lurch onto the tracks. Swanson shouted, "I hope he stops. There's children in that bus." Summers immediately rose from his seat to pull the air horn and slammed the brass handle for the emergency braking system. But the physics were insurmountable. A 1,200-ton train moving at 80 miles per hour requires over a mile to come to a stop. At 7:59 a.m., the blunt, yellow nose of the lead locomotive struck the rear of the school bus. The impact point was a specific section of the bus frame referred to as the 63 inches. The force was equivalent to a massive explosion. The bus was instantly sheared into two pieces. The front section, containing Harms and 17 students, was hurled into a violent barrel roll, tumbling 192 feet through the air before landing on its side in a ditch. The rear section, where most of the children were sitting, was momentarily carried by the locomotive before being dumped 455 feet down the tracks. The impact was so powerful that the rear axle and dual wheels were ripped free from the frame. The silence that followed the impact was more terrifying than the crash itself. Gary Munson, who had been sitting in the front section, later recalled the sound of flying glass and the sight of the roof coming down before a heavy, dark quiet descended. Duane Harms, having been thrown from the bus as it rolled, regained consciousness on the frozen ground. Battered and bleeding from a cut on his temple, he initially didn't know what had happened until he saw the train idling down the tracks. Jerry Hembry found himself rolling through a ditch. Despite a dislocated shoulder and a broken collarbone, his first instinct was to help. He stood up and saw a younger boy lying dead beside him. He then picked up a small boy in his arms, took the hand of a terrified young girl, and began walking toward a white farmhouse to get help. As he walked, the younger child looked up at him and asked, "Jerry, this didn't happen. It's a dream, isn't it?" Trooper Don Gerndt of the Colorado State Patrol was the first officer to arrive, reaching the scene 6 minutes after the radio call. He stopped his white Plymouth and saw a child dead on the road. The field was a nightmare of scattered belongings: a child's shoe, bloody school books, and the twisted remains of bus seats. The news spread through Auburn like a physical shock. Parents rushed to the tracks, running up and down the debris field searching for their children. Juanita Larson arrived and found that her daughter Alice had lived, but her son Steve, who had swapped seats to be with his friends in the back, was gone. The final count was 20 children dead. In many cases, families were decimated. The Heimbucks, Paxtons, Cravens, Brantners, and Whites each lost 2 children in a single second. The tragedy was the deadliest traffic accident in Colorado history, a record that remains to this day. The investigation into the cause of the disaster began almost immediately. Initial blame fell squarely on the shoulders of 23-year-old Duane Harms. Prosecutors argued that even with the frosted windows, a train as large as the city of Denver should have been visible to any attentive driver. Harms was interrogated while still in a state of shock. He wavered when asked if he had stopped. "I always stop at that crossing," he insisted. "That's why I think I did this morning, but I wouldn't swear to it because I just don't remember that well." Harms was charged with manslaughter. The trial, held in a third-floor courtroom in Greeley in early 1962, became a flashpoint for a community desperate for answers. Engineer Herbert Summers testified with certainty that Harms had not not stop, stating that he saw the bus move onto the tracks without hesitation. However, the defense focused on the environmental and structural failures of the crossing. They demonstrated that the 30-degree angle made it nearly impossible for a driver to see down the tracks without physically leaving the bus. On March 24, 1962, the jury returned a verdict of not guilty. While Harms was legally acquitted, the community's judgment was harsher. Within hours of the verdict, he was served with civil lawsuits. One father, Jim Paxton, confronted him directly, telling him, "I want you to know that you killed my kids." Harms was tormented by crank calls and threats, eventually leading him to flee Colorado with his wife and child in the summer of 1962, never to live there again. The tragedy did not end when the trial concluded. It uncoiled through decades, shaping the lives of every survivor and parent. The story of the engineer, Herbert Summers, provides a chilling postscript. Summers continued to ride the rails, but the horror of the bus crash never left him. On November 20th, 1965, nearly 4 years to the day after the Auburn disaster, Summers was once again at the throttle of a Union Pacific passenger train. Near East 96th Avenue in Adams County, a gasoline tanker truck pulled onto the tracks in front of his engine. The resulting collision killed Summers, his fireman, and the truck driver. In a final tragic note, Summers' widow, Anna, committed suicide 3 months later. For the families of Auburn, the trauma manifested in various ways. The Brantner family faced another tragedy just 2 months after losing Mark and Kathy, when another sibling, Johnny, died in a car accident. Decades later, Robert "Bob" Brantner, who had narrowly avoided the 1961 bus crash because he caught a ride with his brother that morning, was accused of killing his wife on the very anniversary of the bus crash, December 14, 1992. In 1994, he was found guilty of second-degree murder and sentenced to 40 years in prison. Though he insisted it was an accident, the coincidence of the date hung over the trial like a ghost. The Greeley bus disaster became a catalyst for sweeping changes in school bus and railroad safety laws. The crossing where the accident occurred was removed in 1962, and the road was eventually rerouted to cross the tracks at a safer 90-degree angle. The tragedy helped lead to the stop, look, listen laws that are now standard across the United States. In Colorado, all school buses are now required by law to stop at all railroad crossings, open the service door, and listen for approaching trains. Perhaps the most significant engineering change was the concept of compartmentalization. Following studies into the Greeley crash, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration developed standards for high-backed, heavily padded bus seats. These seats act as protective barriers, keeping children contained within a safe compartment during a collision. Today, American students are nearly 8 times safer riding in a school bus than in a passenger car with their parents. In 2007, 46 years after the disaster, a 2.5-ton granite memorial was finally erected at the site of the crossing. For the survivors, the memorial was a way to finally acknowledge a grief that had been kept private for nearly half a century. As Juanita Larson noted, the memorial gave the community a sense of healing. The story of the Auburn crossing remains a chilling reminder of the fragility of safety, a tragedy born of a 2-hour delay, a 30-degree angle, and 63 inches of steel that turned a routine school morning into an eternal winter of loss.